Good morning, everyone. My name is Justin Yan. I'm an incoming assistant professor from Baylor University. I recently graduated from University of Tennessee. Today, I'm going to talk about my papers titling "Exploring the Unknown Requires Leveraging Uncertainty: A Real Options Perspective on the Pattern and Outcomes on Entrepreneurial Firms' Internationalization." This is a recording for the 2020 Academy of International Business Annual Conference. So my co-author teams comprise of Dr. Dave Williams from University of Tennessee, who is also my dissertation advisor, and my co-authors Richard Hunt from Virginia Tech University. So prior international business literature, particularly internationalization research focusing on firms' choice of entry modes, tends to primarily examine or looking at the multinational corporations. And then they kind to take this transactional cost economics perspectives, which basically relies on the assumptions of opportunisms, and the opportunisms argues that the host country uncertainties tends to increase the transactional cost when firms internationalizing. And this often results in the delayed or entry, or in terms of like choosing a highly internalized entry mode, such as like wholly owned subsidiaries, as opposed to market-based entry modes, such as strategic alliances or a joint venture, in order to minimize the potential transactional cost or mitigate the potential opportunist behaviors. However, like the inconsistency with the transactional cost predictions, as well as the traditional multinational corporations internationalizations, international entrepreneurship literatures, which tends to focusing more on relatively younger or entrepreneurial firms, argues that actually the entrepreneurial firms can initiate entry despite this high-level host country uncertainty. And they often tend to choose very unique entry modes which fit their potential like firm resources and strategic goals. However, the issue is that the in terms of the IE research, there's still lack of systematic theorizing on the particular role of host country uncertainties during entrepreneurial firms' internationalization process, and how does that actually affecting the international entry performance. And in particular, like prior research do not tend to differentiate the exogenous or endogenous type of uncertainty. And then they also like overlook the fact that the uncertainty can changes over times, and this can fundamentally reshaping like firms' internationalization strategy, entrepreneurial firms' internationalization strategy. And the also because of such lack of understandings, we don't know much about how the performance heterogeneity among relative younger entrepreneurial firms in the national nations. And in this paper, we are trying to complementing the prior transactional cost view with this real option series. And for real option series, we employ such theoretical perspective, and in order to examine the role of host country uncertainty in entrepreneurial firms' internationalization patterns and outcomes, both in terms of entry timing, entry locations, as well as market exit, and the overall like post-entry performance. Just like a brief like overview of real option series. So basically, real option series is a decision-making logics that tends to apply to highly uncertainty environment. And comparing with prior other like theoretical perspective, real option series tend to more focusing on the exogenous source of uncertainty. So meaning the uncertainty originates from the exogenous environments as opposed to firms' internal sources. It also argues in the face of high uncertainties, both decision makers or firms can actually leverage this changing level of uncertainties by employing this real option kind of approach. And this often provides the strategic flexibility and also the superior or systematic asymmetry performance for firms who employ such a real options approach. This and in the practical terms, this often being reflected in firms taking a stepping stone kind of approach or employ launching initial investments and also like adjust their investment levels based on the changing level of uncertainties. And they oftentimes, in contrast to prior either transactional cost view or other theoretical perspective, which tends to emphasize on high initial commitment or internalized entry mode in the face of uncertainty, we often argues that in the face of uncertainties, firms can tend to choose relatively low initial investment. However, like increases the level of collaborations in order to establish the real options, defining as the right but not obligations to exercise certain strategies in the foreseeable future. So the fundamental research question we are trying to answer is, how does host country uncertainty influence entrepreneurial firms' internationalization pattern, both in terms of entry timing, entry locations, entry distance, as well as the post-entry performance of internationalization outcomes? Initially, we know real option theories argues in the face of high host country uncertainty, the attractiveness or feasibility of choosing a real options entry increases. And in order to mitigate the potential cost associated with high host country uncertainties, entrepreneurial firms can choose a relatively lower initial commitment, low initial investments to mitigate the potential downside risk. However, engage in certain level of local collaborations in order to secure the exclusive and preferable access to future upside gains. So aligned with such arguments, we are, in hypothesis one, we are arguing host country uncertainty is positively associated with firms' choice of low initial investment and the collaborative entry mode, in other words, real option entry, as opposed to a high initial commitment and internalized entry modes, such as which we define as the non-real option entry. And in terms of internationalization speed, I mean, the highly internalized and high investment initial entry modes tends to delay the international entry due to the potential higher investment levels and higher commitment. However, choosing a real options entry, in other words, trying to keep your initial investment low and but engaging in still level collaborations does not require necessarily the same level of resources as the non-real option entries. And this often can accelerate the relative entry timing or internationalization speed. So in other words, we are seeing firms' choice of low initial investments and collaborative entry, in other words, real option entry is positively associated with the internationalization speed. In other words, like firms tend to choose this low initial investments, high collaborative entry modes, tends to initiate internationalization faster than those who do not. And then in terms of internationalization locations, prior research argues like firms tend to seek commonalities, however, avoiding potential differences in terms of choosing their foreign destination, internationalization destination. And however, the relative like high investments and highly internalized entry modes will basically like prohibited like firms from choosing a relative more distance market. And in other words, like firms tends to choose relatively less distant country in order to reduce potential investment loss or mitigate the potential uncertainty. However, the real option entries, in other words, a relatively low initial investment, the collaborative entry, can basically do not really bounded firms within a very distant, very like a close kind of a geographic distance. And this can enable them to actually enter more distance like countries through the loss mitigations and the learning kind of a perspective. So in other words, we are saying like firms' choice of low initial investment collaborative entry, in other words, real option entries, is positively with the entry country with the entry countries entry distance over time. So in other words, like firms choose a real option entries can enter more distant like foreign destinations as opposed to non-real option entry, choosing a non-real option entry. And also looking at the potential, the outcomes of the international relations. The real options entries will provide this strategic flexibility on firms for firms to relocate their resources or divest. And in other words, as the uncertainty increases, firms choose real option entries have a more flexibility and to adjust their investment levels or even engage in divestment. And the relative low initial investments entries does not really like lock firms into any specific market, and also reduce the investment irreversibilities as well. And this provide firms with more flexibility and more options to exit in case like situations deteriorated or uncertainty increases over time. So we are arguing like firms' choice of real option entry, in other words, low initial investment and collaborative entries, is positively associated with this international market exits over time. And last but definitely not the least, we want to look at the overall performance implications of entrepreneurial firms' internationalizations through this real options approach. And we know like there is adverse effects of host country uncertainty on the post-entry performance due to the cost associating with the foreign country uncertainty, as well as the potential like downside risk associating with like highly risky, highly uncertainty entry. And however, the choosing in a highly uncertain scenario, like firms choose a low initial investment and collaborative entries can mitigate such potential influence. And this is due to the real options features of like maximizing learning and withholding majority of the resources commitments in order to mitigate potential downside losses. And this can provide this asymmetric kind of performance benefits for firms who choose this real option entry. So in other words, we are saying like firms' real option entries can attenuating the relationships between host country uncertainty and international relation performance, such as like when the host country uncertainty is high, like firms employ this real option entries can perform better than those who do not, due to the real options features of the real option entry. So here is the overall theoretical model and hypothesis. So as we can see, we directly looking at the impact of host country uncertainty on firms' choice of real option entries. And then how does the firm's real option entries influence the international relation pattern in terms of entry timing, entry distance, and the market exit. And last but definitely not the least, we are looking at the performance implication and suggesting like real options can mitigate the adverse performance implications of host country uncertainty. In terms of the overall method, we choose to sample like 680 US younger entrepreneurial exporting firms across industries that engaging in their international entry in the last decade, particularly from 2009 and 2019. And in terms of the overall characteristic of our samples, most of those exporting firms has to initiate international entry within 6 years of funding, inconsistent with prior international entrepreneurship research. And they tend to engage in multiple foreign market entries. And they collectively exporting to more than 147 host countries. And in base, our sample is structured in the firm entry panels, and which comprise of 1,653 observations. In terms of data source, we draw from a proprietary international trade database called DataMine, and to samples the relative younger entrepreneurial exporting firms. And then we use CompuStat and WorldScope to capture the public firms' performance characteristics, and use SDC to capture the cross-border strategic alliance and joint venture activities. And then for private firms, we use Dun & Bradstreet to capture like certain financial and firm informations. Here's the overall like measurement for our key variables. I wouldn't go to detail of them. One thing I want to emphasize that again, for real option entries, we employ a binary variables, with one being firms choosing a relative low initial investment through this like direct exporting combined with certain collaborative agreements, such as the joint venture or equity-based strategic alliances, and zero otherwise. Following up prior similar research conducted by brothers Ryer and Tom. And also for the timing, we captures the initial age, firm's age and initial international entries. And then we using the total cyclic distance of all enters countries based on 4 major dimensions in terms of a cultural, administrative, economic, and geographic distance to capture the entry distance. We use a unique kind of like measurement for entry distance, like a more like inconsistent with recent research being done on cross-country institutional distance by Berry and Dino. For internationalization performance, we capturing firms' total sales 1 year after the initial international entry. For our key independent variable host country uncertainties, we align with the definition of exogenous and epistemic and state uncertainties using a composite measure of host country microeconomics and the institutional conditions. That captures basically two uncertainties. One is institutional uncertainty, other is economic uncertainties. In particular, we employ like empirically, we use standard deviations of yearly kind of economic and institutional indicator in the host country to capture those two uncertainty dimensions. We also capture certain like firm and the industry level characteristics, such as like firm size, industries, subsidiary status, as well as like the overall exporting like values and the industry exporting scale, et cetera, et cetera. For analytical approach, we use the uphold or logistic regressions for our binary dependent variables of real option entries. And for the entry timings, we use discrete time loaded analysis. And also for the continuous dependent variable, we employ the post ordinary least square with robust scenarios, correct for potential heterostaticity. And for robustness checks, we also considering the potential endogenities emerges as a result of the potential unobserved effects of the firm's choice of real option entries. So we, in order to mitigate this, we employ a two-stage least square model using carefully like selected and tested instrument variables. Basically, which is the state international dependencies captures the overall internationalization degrees of the firm's headquarters, like states kind of levels. And this like matched both the relevance and exclusive criteria. So meaning the instrument variables is correlated with the potential endogenous independent variables, however, is uncorrelated with the potential error terms. And we find support for all of our hypotheses. In particular, we see there is a positive effect of host country uncertainty on firms' choice of real option entries. And firms choosing a real option entries can achieve internationalization timing faster and can enter a more distant foreign countries. And they can also like enjoy more flexibility to access the markets over times. And more importantly, we do find the mitigating effect of real option entries on the performance on the uncertainty and performance relationships. And in other words, we do find that firm choosing a real options entries can mitigate the potential negative effect of host country uncertainties on the post-entry performance. In particular, we graph the moderating effect for our main hypothesis 5, looking at the performance implications. As we can see, like firms choosing relative non-real option entries tends to have a negative effect on the performance as the uncertainty increases. However, such like negative effect become less steep. So meaning like the effect become being attenuated when firms choosing a real option kind of entry. So in terms of overall contributions, well, first we want to contribute to internationalization literatures by really re-examines the role of uncertainties in entrepreneurial firms' internationalizations. And we are trying to resolve some of the prior inconsistency between IB series as well as the IE predictions. And then we also tend to try to contribute to the entry mode and entry locations by looking at the overall role of host country uncertainty and firms' choice of real option entries. For real option series, we conceptualize real options as this low initial investments combined with collaborative entries and extended the applicability of real options into the context of entrepreneurial internationalizations. And also we provide proven the existence and the potential performance implications of a real option entries in a highly uncertain scenario. And last but not the least is that we're contributing to international entrepreneurship literatures by looking beyond the timing aspect of entrepreneurial internationalizations. In particular, we holistically examines the entry timing, entry locations, and the entry modes like literatures. And also we are addressing like how do entrepreneurial firms evolve over times and through international nations. So we are looking beyond the initial international entry point for many entrepreneurial firms. With that being said, I mean, that's all for my presentations. I would like to welcome your feedbacks and comments. And if you have any questions or any suggestions, please feel free to contact me through the information provided on the AIB website.